Hello, and welcome to FACT's webinar, Basics of Farm Financials for Successful Pricing. Our guest presenter is Lee Menius. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Manager, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization headquartered in Illinois that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our Humane Farming Program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods Program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Our mentorship application period for mentees has been extended for another week. We are currently welcoming both novice and seasoned farmers ready for the one-on-one support of a seasoned farming mentor. Our experienced humane farming mentors provide guidance and expertise on livestock and land management, improving sales, agritourism, scaling up current farming operations. Our funded farmer grants are currently open and accepting applications. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcerns.org to find out all about our farmer and consumer services. At this time, I am very pleased to introduce our esteemed presenter, Lee Menius. Lee is an NCSU, North Carolina State University, animal science graduate, having worked in the local food scene for over 20 years. He owns and operates wild turkey farms in China Grove, North Carolina, which has spent the majority of its time providing pasture-raised meats direct to consumer and restaurants since its founding in 1998. In 2016, Lee opened Carolina Craft Butchery, and NCDA North Carolina Department of Ag inspected butcher shop along with his wife, Domesty Menius. Lee has worked with Cooperative Extension, Rowan Soil and Water Conservation District, North Carolina Farm School, and NC Choices, where his work has focused on educational projects and working with farmers and processors to develop effective and profitable systems. Throughout his career, Lee has led numerous workshops and producer trainings on topics such as business planning, meat processing, and outdoor swine production. So I absolutely love Lee. I've known him for a while now, and I watched him give this presentation a year ago at the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association conference. And I went into that thinking I knew what I was doing. And at one point in the middle of the presentation, I was like, what? This is amazing. I don't know what I'm doing. I need to pay attention to Lee. So I learned a lot. And even though I thought I knew what I was doing, I didn't really know what I was doing. So hopefully you guys will get as much out of it as I did that first time when I listened to it. So we are very lucky to have Lee with us today to share his experience and expertise. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you, Lee. Please take it away.
All righty. Thank you. Let's see if I can get my screen share going here. Okay, everybody see that okay?
Yep, looks good.
All right. Get this daggone toolbar out of my way. Anyway, so yeah, my name's Lee Menius. I work with the NC Choices program, which is a program of the Center for Environmental Farming Systems and NC State University Extension System. And our program focuses on pasture-raised meats, which has been my background and bad habit, career choice, whatever you want to call it, for the last 25 years. I actually need to update my bio. It started all back in 98. So a few pictures from around that 25 years, like she said, I've farmed and I've had a butcher shop and done a lot of classes. But one of the things that really got me interested in this is years ago, working really closely with some of the folks at Ag Resource Economics. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, I got involved with the NC Farm School program, which is another state university extension program focused on the economics of farming and the business of farming in particular. And so I had worked with them on that and even taught a year of it. And so what I'm going to cover here is going to be very fast and very high level. I really could stand to have about a day and a half to talk to all of you, but everybody gets bored with accounting talk in that amount of time. So we'll squeeze what we can into this hour. But just to remind you, these topics that we covered in farm school, we would probably have about 8 or 9 hours worth of instruction to cover these in depth. So if I don't fully answer your questions, just to be aware that's why it is. So one of the things that, having been in this for 25 years now, is that if you're going to be successful, it's really understanding what is happening within your business. And part of that is understanding the financials and the inputs and how all of those things relate. And really, as you dive into something is like niche agriculture and meats in particular, the margins are extremely thin. And so we need to be really careful when we're putting our pricing down and really get an understanding of how to do that and do that effectively and take everything into account we need to take into account. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of cover a few things in here. We're going to talk briefly about financial goals, kind of understanding your cost, and talk about those different kinds of costs and how they play into the overall financial picture of your operation. We'll touch a little bit about enterprise budgets, and then talk a little bit about using all that information to figure out your pricing structure. Now, this is this is a shortened down version, and so Sam had sent out the slides for those of y'all that wanted to have this presentation, and I think there's about 27 slides in this one. I'm going to follow up with Sam and send y'all out a larger version, which is actually all 47 of my 47 or 48 of my slides, which is going to have some extended examples that you can read through. I think you'll be able to follow those. So starting out, the first thing to do when you're really looking at your operation financially is figure out what is your goal. And this is one of the things we did in farm school, is when we work with people, sit down and it's like, what do you want to accomplish here? And examples of those goals range, and they're different for everybody. For some people, it's, I just want to make enough that I can take my family on to the beach for a week, just need to make a little extra money. That's our vacation fund. For some people, it's a lifestyle. They're moving back. They want to raise their kids up in this environment and own the farm, and kind of a homesteading type situation, or maintaining the family farm. But the primary driver is the lifestyle, and not as much the financial aspects of it. For a lot of folks, it's also just the food security for their own household. So once again, that homestead type situation where you're raising and providing your own food. And then there's those that want to actually make the farm pay for itself and help make the note. If they bought a farm, they've got a payment coming in every month, and they're trying to develop a plan that generates money to pay for that in the long run. And then there's the all-inclusive living wages. And that's what a lot of folks that I had talked to, especially during farm school, is like, I just want the ability to quit my job and live off the farm. And so as you look at these, there's nothing between these five. Oh, I got one more. And there's the tax breaks. And for some people, they have an asset, they're handy, they want to keep it as a farm, so they're looking at the farm as a way to maintain present use value and lower their tax liabilities. And it may also be a business where they're able to leverage against maybe a more successful business and have a write-off, and have a hobby that they can write off as a business. So there's a large variety in all 6 of these goals, but all of these individually are perfectly fine goals. And you may fit into 1, you may fit into 2, you may fit into 3, you may fit into all of these. But just take into account that to know where you're going to get to, you got to pick a destination. And so just like going on a road trip, you don't hop in the car generally and just aimlessly start driving. You at least have an idea of where you want to end up, and that sets the course for how you get there. And so in that same manner, you want to take this financial goal and apply it to your overall plan to make sure you are hitting your financial goals and that you're able to succeed at that. So when it comes to pricing, one thing that is just absolutely imperative is it's got to be based on real numbers and not guesses. You know, you can raise a product, you can sell a product, but can you sell a product for more than what it costs you to raise that product? And if you're trying to figure out that equation, the most important part of that is you got to know your cost. And if you don't know your cost, you can't accurately predict what you're able to do financially from your operation. You also got to be able to understand your cost, because not all costs are clearly delineated. Not all costs are applied in the same manner. And some of them, as we'll talk about later, can apply to multiple things and not just one part of your production. So at the end of the day, this is the old extension mantra is record keeping is everything. So, you know, you've got to keep good records if you're going to successfully understand your cost and know what your costs are. Now, I'm going to also make the statement that this is my whole presentation, because our program is based on meats, is going to be with a meat bias on products. But the principles I'm going to talk about can be applicable whether you've got half a dozen beehives in the backyard or whether you're running a vegetable garden and CSA, whatever. Just you know, these business principles are applicable across the board. So when it comes to record keeping, Sam did forward me some questions, some of the questions y'all had put in whenever you registered. And I noticed this one came up a lot, was like, record keeping, what do I do? How do I do it? What's the best way? And, you know, at the end, the most effective thing I can tell you is don't drown in data. You know, you can track anything and everything on your farm to the 100th degree. And if it's not something that you're going to actually sit down and use productively at some point in time, then I would say be careful about recording that data. As the old adage goes, just give it the KISS treatment. Keep it stupidly simple, or keep it simple stupid. Depends on whether you're talking about your system or talking to somebody else. But keep it simple and identify those things that you need to record, those that are relevant to what you want to learn, and then make it really easy and convenient to record it and analyze it. So I know there are, for different enterprises, cattle, hogs, poultry, CSA programs you can go out, you can buy, you can subscribe to, that will help you track your production. It'll help track your sales. It'll help track all this. And you can do that. And if you find a system that works for you, that's great. But at the end of the day, if you can spend all the money in the world, but if it's not convenient, you're going to lose interest. You're not going to be inclined to do it. For me, we ran pasture pork. We ran a lot of hair sheep. You heard we ran some finishing beef cattle, and then we did about 2,000 pasture broilers a year and a couple hundred turkeys. And so for me, it was a matter of, I'm out there all the time. I need something that's right there, something that I don't have to sit down in my chair at the end of the day and drop into a spreadsheet. And one of the best things that I came across was putting good use to this phone in my pocket. And so I developed a love for Google Forms. If you're not familiar with those, it's a service that can tie back into Google Sheets, which is Google's version of Excel. But just make out a form that tracks what you want to track, and then make it to where you have the link accessible on your phone, and you can pull it up and you can fill out that form anytime you need to track this. So my primary uses were when I was grinding feed for the pigs. I had a form that would record the date, would record the feed ration that I was making, how much I made of it, and what group of animals it went to. And then once I hit send and that Google form went in, it put all that information, automatically populated a Google spreadsheet for me. And so whenever I wanted to, I could access that spreadsheet and I could look and I could see how much feed went, of what rations went to what groups. Also came in really handy as I made another one that was my monthly inventory by pasture. And so once early in the month, I could ride around, punch in the date on it, ride around and count and say there's 10 pigs over here, there's 30 pigs in pasture B, there's 75 pigs back here in pasture C. I've got 3 cows in pasture D and 14 sheep in pasture F. And so it made it really easy. And then once I hit send, it automatically populated that. And so then I had readily had access to those records when I needed them. And it made it, being in spreadsheet form, made it really easy to analyze. And that's basically all these other record keeping systems that you're going to pay for are doing. So if you're inclined, you like spreadsheets, or have a knack for at least using spreadsheets, you can set you up something pretty quickly that'll keep up with basic data. But at the end of the day, just make sure you find a system that works for you. Because it, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's not convenient, you're not going to follow up on it like you need to be. So let's look at our cost. So when we're calculating cost, we're going to lump them into 3 basic areas. First off is our cost of goods. These are also known as variable cost. Why are they known as variable costs? Because they change and they all depend on your production. These are items like the amount of livestock, your feed cost, any number within that increases as your production increases or decreases means that it's variable. So it's directly tied to your output of your operation. So the more cattle you do, the more cattle you got to buy, or the more feed you have to buy. So think of it that way. It's variable. So it changes with your production. And then on meats, it's the processing. So the more cattle you get processed, the higher that processing bill is going to be at the end of the year. Our next category is going to be overhead. Now, these are your overhead or your fixed cost, as generally referred to in accounting. But these are items that you have to pay regardless. And so things like rent, facilities, equipment, vehicles, anything, you've got a rent payment that comes due on your farm, or a farm payment that comes due on your farm every month or every quarter or every year. That doesn't matter. That payment's the same whether you have 1,000 chickens on it or you got 100,000 chickens on it. That payment does not change with your production, and therefore it's considered an overhead or a fixed cost. And it needs to be treated a little bit different than your cost of goods. And then the third is good old labor. And when we're talking about labor, you need to be thinking of it in terms of paid and unpaid. My grandma always liked to tell me, says, well, you just don't ever count your time for anything, because you count your time, you can't make any money farming. And, sometimes you wonder about that. But if you don't track it and you don't account for it, you sure aren't never going to have it built in. So with labor, we want to look at our paid, because that's a direct expense. And we also want to look at our unpaid, because a lot of us, especially in the small farming world, we're operating on family help. We've got our kids, we've got our wife, we got our family members out there that are helping us. And even though we're not having to pay them, and therefore it's not a direct expense, when we start doing things like our pricing and accounting for our business plan, we want to take those unpaid labor hours into account. Because what happens if it's me and my wife out there and we're working and I'm not taking my labor into account, I'm just counting on whatever I actually make off the farm to be my paycheck, is that what happens if something happens to me and I get paralyzed, or I end up in the hospital for an extended period of time, or I'm out of commission? Then the alternative is to hire somebody to replace myself. And if I haven't accounted for that labor cost, then I'm going to be up the creek. And it's going to be a real challenge to try to build that into my cost after I'm already rolling. So if for no other reason, at least account for it in your record keeping, so that you can allocate a cost to it, even if you don't realize it is an actual cost that you're cutting a check for every so often. So with that variable cost or cost of goods, like I said, it's what increases or decreases with production. And this is applicable to specific enterprises. So let's see, let me just pull everything up here. All right, so once again, these are things like feeding, bedding, ear tags, wormers, medication, processing costs, all these costs that increase or decrease depending on how many animals you do. So there's a direct correlation there. And so when you look at it from the point of what do we do with that? Now we know what those costs are, but what do we do with that in assigning our cost of goods? So this actually works out because they're variable and because they are specific to the amount of production, makes them a little bit relatively easy to assign. And so most of these can be estimated from typical averages. So you don't need to know the exact amount of feed that went into a pig or a chicken. What you do need to know is at least have a accurate idea of how much feed are you feeding to a group of chickens. So if you're feeding 100 chickens and you're feeding them, I don't even remember what was a chicken eat 25 pounds a day or whatever, then you need to know that 100 out of those 100 chickens, on average, that one chicken got 2.5 pounds or whatever it is, or 0.25 pounds, excuse me. So if but you can average it out. You don't have to know everything on an individual basis, because when we're looking at these variable costs, we're generally assigning those to a specific part of our operation. So like our chicken feed is going to change with the amount of chickens we raise, but it doesn't necessarily affect anything that, about our rate that we feed our pigs or our pig feed cost. And so it's very specific to the chicken aspect of our operations. Once again, good records. They're going to improve your accuracy. So running through an example of pig feed. So an example, you have 40 tons of pig feed purchased at $400 a ton. And this is fed to 100 pigs. $400 a ton times 40 tons means that you spent about $16,000 on pig feed. So if you divide that 16,000 out by the 100 pigs that it went into, you can allocate each pig on average at $160 worth of feed cost. So now as we're pricing those pigs, we can look at it and we say, okay, now we know on average those pigs ate $160 worth of feed. We gave $80 a piece for them as feeder pigs. So between those two costs, we now have $240 in it. So we now are starting to establish a line of record keeping that supports our cost input so we can effectively price. Now, the next one, the overhead fixed cost gets a little bit trickier, because once again, this is assigned to big overhead costs and things like your farm, your equipment, buildings, etc. And a lot of times, especially on our smaller diversified operations where you got 16 different enterprises going on, those particular costs end up seeing a lot more use across species or enterprises on the farm. And so now we've got to figure out, how do we take these things and move them into something that makes them applicable on a per animal basis? And I didn't mention it, but we were talking about the software and the expenses, QuickBooks, record keeping software, etc. Those payments, that's either a one-time payment or a monthly subscription that's due every month regardless. And so that qualifies as a fixed cost. I said any of this that does not vary, but is there reoccurring on a regular basis and generally a calendar year period, can be treated like a fixed cost. One thing that one other thing that I'll have on this list is labor can be that too. If you have salaried employees or you're treating yourself as a salaried employee. So if you set your salary that, hey, I'm going to pay myself $40,000 a year off of this farm, then that can be treated as a fixed cost, because that is not going to change. That salary is not going to change depending on how much you work or how much you produce, but if that's your goal. So you can treat that as a fixed cost also. So when it comes to fixed cost, one of the golden rules is that fixed cost needs to be appropriately sized and operated at capacity. About 15 years ago, I was working with a group of hog producers down in eastern North Carolina, and we had a speaker come in, Dave Stender from Iowa State, and they had just wrapped up about an 8 or 10 year study that they had done with Nyman Rich farmers raising niche pork. And he had it was just hot off the press at that time. He says, here's our results. And he asked the group, and these were seasoned pig farmers. He says, what makes the most profitable operation? What makes an operation profitable? And, everybody said number of pigs per litter, number of pigs raised, number of pigs weaned, feed efficiency. He says, actually, he was like, our most productive farms were some of our lowest in profitability. He says, the ones that rose to the top of profitability and looking at actual profit in their operations were the ones that had capital investments, fixed cost, overhead, whatever you want to call it, overhead cost, and that were used to capacity. They were appropriately sized and used to capacity. He says that way they were the most efficient at utilizing that expenditure. So what do I mean by that? Let's take an example of a tractor. So if you're out and about and you're looking in the market for a tractor, this is Big Bud. I think this is the largest manufactured horsepower tractor ever made, produced back in 81 or 83, something like that. I'm not a tractor specialist, I don't remember. And there's only a handful of them in the United States. With an 80-foot cultivator, this will do, I think it will cultivate an acre a minute. So it's extremely enormous, extremely powerful, and extremely thirsty piece of equipment. Now, if you're in a small vegetable operation and you've got 2 acres of ground to do, is this a good investment that you're working with vegetables? Probably not. I mean, it will get you done. It'd take you longer to hook up the cultivator than it would take you to cultivate your entire 2 acres. But the cost on Big Bud's going to be exponential compared to something that you need. And so a more appropriately sized asset would be something like the old red belly here. So if you're working on a small scale, you want to make sure you have a tractor that's adequate to meet your needs, but not overly priced or oversized as to make it inefficient on your operation. And vice versa, if you're running 15,000 acres of grain farm out in the Dakotas, you probably don't want to try to cultivate that with the old red belly tractor. Big Bud would probably be money well spent in that type of situation, because the price for the amount of work it gets done, it costs less for that unit of work than it costs less to get that acre cultivated with Big Bud than it would with the red belly. But you got to have enough acreage to spread it out on to make Big Bud worth the while. So once we've thought about it, we've appropriately sized them and everything, let's calculate and start thinking about how do we assign that? Because this is something that is done over multiple enterprises. Generally speaking, fixed costs are assigned with a depreciation schedule. And that means a cost per year or a cost per unit of production or a cost of unit of time. And there's 2 types of depreciation. People are probably most familiar with the term when it relates to taxes. I'm not a tax person. Nothing that I tell you here today is to be solicited as tax advice. Go talk to a tax attorney if you want to learn about depreciation and what's right for you. On the other hand, we're going to address it from a budgeting standpoint. So as a financial planning standpoint, we want to look at that piece of equipment and budget a depreciation for that equipment over time. And depreciation is basically saying, how much should I be setting back on a per hour or per year or per unit basis to replace this when it dies? Because everything has a lifespan. So the formula for coming up with this is to take the purchase price, and then subtract your projected salvage price. So if you buy a tractor for $200,000 and you project that you're going to use it for 10 years and you're going to sell it for $100,000, then you would take the $200,000 minus the $100,000, which leaves you with $100,000, right? And then you divide that by the useful life of 10 years. And so that means that tractor is going to cost you about $10,000 a year in ownership cost, not counting maintenance, etc. So taking that to a pig barn, let's make the example that we built a new hoop barn for finishing pigs. This hoop barn cost us $30,000. We figured that it's going to have a useful life of 20 years. We'll be able to make it work. But at the end of that 20 years, anything being run, occupied by pigs for that long, chances are it's not going to have any salvage value whatsoever at the end of that 20-year lifespan. So plug your numbers into our formula. We got 30,000, it's going to last 20 years. We come up with the assumption that it's going to cost us around $1,500 a year, just in the depreciation on it. Now, if you want to be really more accurate, let's assign a maintenance cost. A lot of times when you look at enterprise budgets, they'll assign a maintenance cost to fixed assets, and it can vary depending on what you start with. If you're buying used equipment, you probably need a higher maintenance cost because you're getting a lower price on the front, but you're going to have higher maintenance cost as you go. You're buying new equipment, you can probably have a lower maintenance cost, but you can figure out something that works for you. For this, we're going to assume about 2% annual maintenance, which is about $600 a year. And that's going to cover boards, it's going to cover gates, it's going to cover torn up concrete, busted water pipes, all that fun stuff. But we look at that and we say, all right, that's going to be $12,000 total now and over those 20 years. And so we add that 12,000 to our 30,000 for 42,000. And now divide that, and we come up with an updated cost of around $2,100 a year that it cost us to own and maintain that building. So now that we've established that cost, $2,100 a year, we've built our barn so it has a capacity of 50 pigs. We figure with our turns, we can turn 3 groups a year. We're gonna turn a group every 4 months, and so that gives us the overall capacity in a year's time to raise about 150 pigs through this barn. So $2,100 divided by 150 pigs, it's going to be $14 per pig in overhead cost assigned to each of those pigs. So now what I was talking about with using it efficiently. So here's an example of what if we underutilize that asset. So instead of running it at a full capacity of 50 pigs per turn, what if we reduce it down to 20, which equals 60 pigs a year instead of 150? So we do the numbers again, and as you can see, that 2,100 divided by 60 ends up 35, and it almost was at almost 2.5 times the overhead assigned to it. Now that doesn't seem like a tremendous amount of money, but when you start talking about something like niche agriculture and small scale agriculture, every dollar counts when it comes to profitability. Another example of a little bit different, let's say we bought a tractor, and pig barn's unique because it's specific to our pigs, right? We're probably not going to throw the chickens in there with the pigs or cattle or sheep. But now when it comes to a tractor is something that's going to be used across enterprises and across the farm. So we're going to buy a new tractor. We're going to purchase it for $50,000. We're going to use it for 10 years. And and we're going to assume that we're going to put about 500 hours a year on it, and we're going to be able to sell it at that point in time for about $20,000. So running our formula, 50,000 minus 20,000 equals 30,000. That's the cost to own it over that 10-year period, or $3,000 a year on a yearly basis. So now if we take that a little bit further, we could break that down by the hour, right? So we take that 30,000 and we can say, well, we're going to use it 5,000 hours during that period. So let's assign it to on an hourly basis. That will sure make our ability to assign that to task and to different enterprises a lot easier, right? So by taking this and assign it down to a unit, that we can now apply that hourly unit across as needed across enterprises. So we come up with our hour. It costs us $6 an hour every time we run that tractor and depreciation cost. So for a truer calculation, we've probably taken the maintenance cost, just like we did with the pig building. We're going to add about $1,500 a year. Let's see, and then we multiply that times the amount of years. We add that up to our 30,000 that it cost us, and we're now up to, it cost us $45,000 over that 10-year period, or $4,500 a year, or the new math equals $9 an hour. So we've now updated to reflect those that changing maintenance requirements. So now that we've got our costs associated, we can look at this and look at how do we assign it across our enterprises. In this this kind of example, can apply in the vegetable world to tractors. It can apply to sheds. You can apply this to fencing. Fencing is one I get asked about fairly often. And, you know, if it costs X amount of dollars to fence a farm, then you look at how many animals you may run on that farm and then divide it out in a similar fashion according to usage. So with this, the tractors, we're going to figure the pigs are going to carry the brunt of our work on the tractor, because we're going to use this tractor. Pigs are our primary thing. We're grinding feed, we're moving pigs, we're renovating pastures, and we figure that that's going to take us about 420 hours per year, or 84% of our total time that we're going to use it is going to get counted towards the pig. So we can now allocate 420 hours, $9 an hour for $37.80 towards the pigs. Now, what about the cattle? So cattle, we're going to use it. We're going to feed hay. We're going to clip the pastures every year, you know, a few odds and on end thing, but not very much. So we figure we'll put about 80 hours on it. And you know, that's going to equate to 16 hours or $720 that needs to be allocated in overhead costs for that tractor towards our cattle part of our operation. And so when it comes to the chickens, we don't even need it. So why should the chickens have to carry the burden of our overhead cost if it's not something that's needed in that enterprise? And so this way, by doing it by the hour or by the unit of output, it allows us to really target it and really let the enterprises that need that piece of that asset to carry the weight of it. And so it wouldn't be fair if we just took it and divided that $4,500 a year. The chickens are now being penalized $1,500. The cattle are being penalized $800, and the pigs are getting off scot-free with $2,200 in savings. And so it really skews your financial records and doesn't allow you to price your products as accurately as you could be by allocating it accurately. Excuse me. So, like I said before, if your goal is wages, then you really should include yourself in the calculations. Now, I know there are a couple different trains of thought on this. The one I happen to subscribe to and agree to is that you count yourself as your labor, what you want to make or what you need to make, or some way, shape, or form as the owner. And if you do that, then you set yourself up to really be disciplined in your pricing and in your goal setting, so that you're always covered. The other track of thinking is that you're the owner, and therefore any end of your profit becomes your revenue. That sets the goal a little bit further down the road. And so when you have that goal, it's to me, it's a little bit easier to stay disciplined if you have yourself figured into the mix from the get-go. But when it comes to your calculations, think about your paid and unpaid. And your paid's going to include the things like your hourly wages, any benefits you offer, any taxes that you have to pay associated with that. And then don't forget that there are also some variable or overhead costs that can follow this, like workers' compensation insurance. Unpaid, your time, family time, volunteers. The key is regardless whether it's paid or unpaid, is know where your labor is going. Once again, it's like the feed. You don't have to know it to the nth degree. You don't have to know every minute spent on every little thing, but you need to have a good idea of what proportion of your time you're using each week towards the different enterprises. And so it may take actually sitting down. You don't probably don't want to have a time clock station on the fence post all around the farm, punching in and out of enterprises. But you can take and periodically go through and sit down at the end of the day and put yourself in a spreadsheet and say, all right, it was an average Monday, and I spent, this many hours working the pigs, this many hours working chickens, this many hours working with the cattle, this many hours on office work, this many hours going to the processor, etc. And so you can do that and just periodically, maybe once a month, spend the week sitting down at the end of the day and dropping that in a spreadsheet or a record book so that you have something to look back on and figure out, oh, I'm spending 30% of my time on the chickens and 60% of the time on the pigs, and I'm spending 10% doing this daggone paperwork that I don't like to do. And so by tracking that, that's going to allow you to really focus on what you're good at, focus your energy on those places that are making you money, and focus on the things that you're good at and what you're not good at. Because if you can identify what you're not good at, chances are a lot of times you're going to be cheaper. You're going to be better off and cheaper in the long run to hire somebody that really is good for that. Hiring that accountant to do the bookkeeping rather than you sitting up pulling your hair out till midnight when you should be in bed getting ready to get up at 4 o'clock to go haul pigs to the butcher. So, but if you don't really start thinking about where you're spending your time and where that focus is going, you don't really have we tend to skew ourselves towards thinking about what we enjoyed. Oh, well, yesterday was fun. I worked pigs, but I forgot about the damn 3 hours that I spent doing that because I blocked it out of my mind. But by writing it down, then you can look back and you go, man, I'm spending a lot of time doing books and I'm doing a poor job of it. And therefore I probably would be better off to hand that off to somebody who knows what they're doing. And like I said before, it's really important to track that unpaid labor just so you can, if you have to replace it, it's already built into the budget. So putting it all together, this is a really, really dumb, simple example. But looking at raising a couple feeder pigs. So we have 2 examples here. What if we raise a group of 1 pig, and what if we raise a group of 10? So feeder pigs, variable cost, fixed cost. Variable. That's right. Good job, y'all. So that's right. The more feeder pigs we raise, the higher that price goes up. We raise 1 feeder pig, costs us $60. We raise 10, we have to buy 10 of them. So we now have $600 out of pocket. Pen, water, tub, shelter. Generally, if we can build a shelter for a pig, doesn't take that much more. So I'm going to say the same size shelter, that same water tub, and the same size pen roughly costs us the same for 1 pig as it did for 10. Therefore, overhead cost, right? Yeah, because it doesn't change with production. You have that pig pen. So now we're running it with 1 pig, we're running it with 10 pigs. But you can see that cost is the same regardless of the scenario. Feed, 900 pounds of pig to get him to a market size, $400 a ton. So $180 in feed cost versus $1,800. Labor, we go out, We're spending an hour a day. We're feeding the pig, petting the pig, cleaning his water out. It's really about the same amount of labor to feed 10 pigs as it is to feed one pig. And therefore, we see that we've gained efficiency. So that labor cost is spread over 10 pigs instead of one pig. So when we put the numbers together, we have our one pig cost us almost half as much to raise as it did 10 pigs when we add all these costs up, because we were less efficient in labor, we were less efficient in the overhead cost. And so when we break that out on a per pig basis, that means that our break-even cost on that single pig was $2,090 versus our 10 pigs, where our input cost was $425. Now, so if I'm going to sit here and do my pricing, and I'm going to sell a pig, and my goal is to make $300 off of it, which is going to be the easier way. I bet I can sell 10 pigs for $725 quicker, about as quick or quicker than somebody could sell one single pig for $2,400. So by utilizing our labor, utilizing our overhead cost, we're running. Man, I need to speed this up. Opportunity cost. This is something that often gets overlooked, but it's basically the cost of something in a foregone opportunity. And so you've got to take it into account. If we're calculating for a pig operation, current market price for corn is $5 a bushel. We can grow our own corn and only cost me $3.10 a bushel. Which number do we use when it comes to doing our budgeting purposes? We use them both, because our opportunity cost is if we can raise it for $3.10, we can sell it and make $1.90 a bushel. Yeah, it may cost us $3.10, but if we run it through a pig, we want to make sure we're at least making that $1.90 plus enough to make it worth the trouble of keeping the pig around and running that corn through. And so we're going to use both. And we're going to run a budget for each, because if we can't make money on the pig putting $3.10 corn in it, then we sure as hell ain't going to make any money at $5 if we assign a corn value at $5. And that's all based on what we could actually get for that pig. And so we would be better off marketing our corn on the free market. And so that's what I've done in this example. Like I said, these things will be in your slides, so you can go back, the recording you'll be able to go back to also. Enterprises are just a business of producing a product. And so I want you to think about this as, how do we determine enterprise cost? And so generally looking at it, we look at it as our cattle are an enterprise, our poultry are an enterprise, our pigs are an enterprise. And we evaluate those separately from each other, with the exception of how, we're going to apply our overhead that goes to all of them. But if we look at them, we evaluate them, especially when we sit down and we take our labor tracking records that we've been, we can look and we can focus on where we're making money. And so if we track these by enterprise, we can look at them and say, all right, well, the pigs are where I'm making 80% of my profit and spending 10% of my time. The chickens are where I'm making 10% of my profit, but I'm spending 80% of my time. So what if I took that 80% of my time that I'm spending on the chickens and applied it to being better and growing my pig business? It allows me to focus on that by breaking those out and not treating it as a whole farm adventure. So treating within that, take it and think of how can you break it down, and let's treat each of those segments within those enterprises separately. So if we've got a cow-calf operation and we're selling meat from it, so we're maintaining a breeding herd, we're weaning that calf, we're keeping the calf, we're finishing the calf, and then we're processing and marketing it as meat. So there's opportunities. We can break that down into multiple enterprises and look at them and say, all right, I may be really inefficient in running a cow-calf operation because I don't have a lot of land. So determining that I'm inefficient at it, and I can maybe actually buy a calf that I need to start the background and start here at the backgrounding, or start here at the finishing system for a cheaper price than what I can produce it prior to it in the timeline. Excuse me. Enterprise budgets are generally just plug and play budgets, available extension websites. I'm not going to dive into them. Here's an example of outdoor pasture fair to finish, pasture-based fair to finish budget that I helped work on about 10 or 15 years ago. So if your enterprise budgets will work best if you have accurate records, you know what your costs are, you can plug in real costs versus the generic ones that come in it. But regardless of anything we've talked about at this up to this point, what do you do if you're not got a clue where you're at now? And so, it's not a problem. Just take your enterprise budget and start with what you know, or use the standard assumptions. There are standard costs. Most of those are outlined, and then you can plug in more realistic ones. But you can also use your starting point. So if you're in a cow-calf operation, you want to say, hey, is it worth me to keep it and finish it? I don't have a clue what it costs me to raise that calf and get it to weaning, but I do know what the value of that calf is that day at the sale barn that I did wean it. And so I can now assign that value that's the opportunity value of selling that calf at $1,100 or whatever weaned calves are bringing at the moment. And now I'll plug that in as my starting point. That's my cost of production. Now add the backgrounding, then add the finishing cost, add the processing cost. And now I've got all my costs moving forward. And I need to look at it and see, can I price my product high enough that I can make all that worth it? And of course, we're in December now, so there's always the opportunity to make a New Year's resolution to do a better job next year, and ask Santa Claus for some good record keeping for Christmas. Some things to consider, sometimes the highest priced outlets may not be the most profitable. You have to take volume into consideration. If I can get $5,000 for a pig, that's great. But chances are I'm going to have very small number of customers willing to pay me $5,000 for a pig. At the same time, I may have plenty of customers that would pay me $1,000 to put a pig in their freezer. And so looking at that, I need to look, how much can I realistically expect to sell? If you're going to a farmer's market, yeah, you may be able to get extremely high prices, but what volume are you going to be able to sell? My buddy Matt LaRue, who's an ag economist up at Cornell, one of his favorite things is talking with folks, and he says, I go up to people at the market all the time, and they're like, yeah, I haven't had a good day here all year. And he says, well, what have you got? They've got one cooler back there with meat in it. And he says, well, if I can buy everything you have for $500, how are you ever going to sell $1,500 worth of meat? And it's the same principle applies when you're looking at markets, is can you produce enough of it to meet the demand? And is the demand there to enough there and willing to pay you enough to make it worth your while? So some of those, I know chefs that will pay extremely high prices for a nice charcuterie pig. Problem with charcuterie pigs, the big lard breeds, is that a chef's going to take a 300-pound pig carcass and he's going to make a lot of salamis that last a very long time. So he's not going to buy another charcuterie pig next week. It's probably going to be 6 months or a year out before he buys another one. Thinking about the volume you can move, selling a whole animal to a single customer at a lower price gets rid of the animal. The key when it comes to meat marketing especially is getting rid of that entire animal, finding a home that pays you for every part of that animal. And so the easier that transaction becomes to move a lot of that product, the better, the lower price you can take, because you're gaining efficiency. You're getting rid of it quicker versus the amount of work you're having to do, which is basic marketing. So versus selling them by the cut, with additional marketing, labor, and everything. Also consider additional equipment, labor, and time, travel, mileage, etc. If you've got to go further to more markets, all that needs to be taken into account and treated as an expense. This is our Meat Suite website, which is meatsuite.com. It's a directory that we have at NC Choices, and we work with Cornell University in New York. It's a directory of farmers selling in bulk. This is not applicable at the moment to anybody outside of North Carolina and New York, but we are really working to try to develop this into a site, not only as a directory, but as a resource page for farmers. So if you look up here in the corner, if you go to meatsuite.com, you can click on this For Farmers tab. And even if you're not North Carolina, New York, it will take you to a page where you will be able to click and you can go and try out the Cornell Meat Price Calculator. And this is a free tool. It's available to anybody around the country that wants to try it. And it's basically a dressed up spreadsheet that Matt LaRue developed. You can put in your production costs. You can put in your different added processing cost. You can put in variables like how much your marketing expenses are, how much volume you're selling, how much travel expenses, value added products, all sorts of options. And you can create these scenarios where you look at, what does it look like? What do my profits look like if I go to a farmer's market and I sell a beef a month, and with all the extra added cost, versus what if I sell a beef as freezer beef in quarters to 4 of my neighbors? And you can run those different scenarios and play with the pricing and work with determining your goals and making sure your pricing meets that. Now, I know that's probably going to be a little bit disappointing to some of y'all, that, you know, we covered a lot of ground, and we really didn't dive in and look at the pricing aspect. But when you're thinking about pricing your product, there's a few things to take into account. So first and foremost is, what does it cost you? So your cost or your cost, that doesn't change. You know, your sad feelings towards wanting to provide it to anybody or everybody doesn't change the fact that it costs you X amount of dollars to produce a product. You know, there are places that you can go that will more readily pay you for that product and pay you a price that looks at that's above there and gives you that profit margin you need, which is the difference between what you got in and what you're selling it for. And so when you're evaluating markets and you're looking at your pricing, a lot of times, especially if you're in rural areas, it really boils down to, you may have to travel to some urban areas to get the higher prices, especially if your input costs are very high. If you're doing this on a small scale, you're not going to be near as efficient as somebody that's, you know, buying one bag of feed at a time. It's not near as efficient as somebody that can buy a tractor trailer load and put it in a bin. And so when we were doing it, we were buying our corn by the dump truck load, and my feed costs were about $300 a ton, where bulk feed was running at the time about $500, $550 a ton. I don't even know what that would be now, but even with the high grain prices, my feed costs still stayed around $325 in 2008, when corn spiked to $8 a bushel. It didn't change a terribly high amount. It didn't double it, because corn was only a part of my feed ration. But, you know, the feeds themselves, bagged feeds themselves, more than doubled in 2008.
All right.
So, anyway,
yeah. We're right at 4 o'clock, and I do want to answer some of the questions, but I am going to launch our end of webinar poll, so Lee can take a little bit of a break, and so that you guys can answer our questions. We really appreciate you answering them. I know it's a little bit of a pain to answer them because I keep making it longer and longer, but it does help us as far as getting financing and getting, you know, everything that we need, and reporting and all that kind of stuff, so we can get more money, so we can keep offering webinars for free. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll let that go for a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead, Lee, and start with the first question, and you guys will answer maybe 10 minutes. Is that okay with you, Lee, if we go over by 10 minutes?
I'm here, so I'm glad to talk however long you want to keep the record going. So
All right, sounds good. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but yeah, so let's just get right into it while everybody answers my poll questions. So Jerry says, would you know of any smartphone apps that facilitates workers tracking the time they spend on different farm tasks during the day? Tracking labor costs is so important. Actually, there was a link sent in the chat by Nick, and I've already put that in an email that I'm going to send you guys tomorrow. So you probably asked that, Jerry, before Nick did that. So I'm going to go ahead and just send you that link that he shared with us, which was very nice. So thank you, Nick.
And I want to tell you again, just state again that the PDF that Sam will send out to you now is going to be about twice as long as what I presented, and have a lot more of these examples that I wasn't able to cover in the hour today. So
perfect. We should have scheduled this for an hour and a half, Lee. I'm sorry.
Or a day and a half.
A day and a half. No. It's too long. Maybe if you're in North Carolina, you could do it with somebody could attend. If you're in North Carolina, attend one of the NC Farm schools, and maybe you can get Lee.
Or Carolina Meat Conference is coming up.
Oh, that's right.
30th and 31st of 2024, and we will be at Appalachian State University in Boone. And so,
yeah, that is, I've been to that. I've been to every single Carolina Meat Conference, and I went to the Women in Meat Conference, and it's an amazing conference. So if you can get to Boone, and FACT will definitely be offering scholarships, so for up to $400. So keep that in mind if you want to travel to beautiful Boone, which is a gorgeous part of North Carolina. Okay, Carrie's asking about equipment depreciation. How do you know the lifespan of different types of equipment, and how do you depreciate equipment that is purchased, used, and possible is already beyond its lifespan of the equipment? Yeah, I got some of them too, Carrie.
I got a lot. I've had lots of those over the years. And a lot of times it's just the best guess. If you're looking at tractors and equipment like that, you can take a Fast Line magazine. Don't necessarily have to have like a KBB type outline of exactly what every bell and whistle is on your thing, but take it and look on classifieds, look on that Fast Line magazine, which is an equipment trader magazine. And say, all right, I'm looking at a 5000 series John Deere tractor with this many hours on it. What do I see? 5,000 hours. If I'm looking at one with 1,000 hours on it, what do I see them going for with 5,000 hours on them? And then that gives you an idea of, oh, this guy wants 75,000 for this one, and I see they're going for 50,000 with 5,000 hours on them. That gives you your two values. Then kind of guess at look at the age of that tractor now, and look at the age of, sometimes it's a guessing game, but you want to make it as educated a guessing game as you can. And so a lot of times it's like just looking at same brands or same level of quality, and the same horsepower or same type use, and taking a good guess at how long it'll last.
There were a couple of questions related to that, so thank you for that. John asks, in a cow-calf operation, would a purchased heifer actually be a fixed cost spread over the life of the cow?
Yes, that's exactly how you would treat that.
Okay.
And so, like I said, I'm not a tax person, but raised animals and bought animals are also treated different on your taxes. So make sure, you keep track of which animals were calves. If you have a heifer born on your farm and it stays in there, it is treated differently in a tax application when you sell it than a bred heifer you bought, calved, and kept for 5 years and then sell it. But yeah, you would look at that same thing as, all right, what does that cow cost me in ownership? What's her start price? What's her average or salvage price? And what's her lifespan?
All right, Corbin, I love the name Corbin, has a question. Are there any specific ways / rules of thumb to figure out how big of an asset to get, tractor, barn, etc., especially when you're thinking about how big of an asset to get when you're looking to grow over the next few years?
Yeah, and so that can be a challenge, especially building in for growth. So, if you don't have the ability to build modularly, like build a building that's easily added on, and you're looking at it, you're saying, all right, sometimes you've got to look at it and say, all right, where am I? Where do I want to be 2, 3, 5 years down the road? and it's, let me run the numbers on this. If I build big enough for 5 years down the road, and I know I'm going to run it at half capacity, run your budget on how much am I losing over those 5 years while I get to capacity, and then weigh that against what if I build it the right size now, and then just build another building or build onto it, because now you've got how much am I losing or adding to my cost by underutilizing it for that period of time. And then you apply that to what you would expect to be able to retrofit or replacement value at a further point down the road. So it can be challenging, but you can take those same scenarios and just run them and kind of figure out, hey, I know I'm going to have an extra $10 per pig, in overhead cost while I'm building up my herd, but 2 years from now, I'm going to bring that down from $25 a pig to $15 a pig by getting more efficient as I grew into it. And I don't want to have to build another building in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years.
Okay. So Heather would like to know how you would adapt pricing for flowers and or vegetables.
I have no idea.
I'm very meat focused as well. So as soon as somebody starts talking about anything,
yeah, and,
like, I don't know.
I did like 40 member CSA for a few years, and it can be a challenge. So to me, it's looking at on almost a square foot basis. So much like we would treat our pastures, imagine your garden being your whole farm fenced in. It's like, how much is allocated to tomatoes? How much is allocated to, what percentage of that? And then trying to allocate, like, how many green beans can I expect to get off of that portion of that acreage, and trying to figure out what that highest use value. Does that make sense? So allocating the real estate and then trying to figure out what crop has the least amount of inputs in regards to the most amount of income potential.
Okay. Dana asks or says, I think it's a question, Meat Sweets doesn't do poultry. Do you guys have plans on doing poultry, or do you feel like poultry just doesn't really fit into? Because I've looked at Meat Sweet before, and it seems like it's more how to break
on the meat price calculator aspect of it.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes it a little more challenging if you've got it's definitely set up more towards the by the cut deal for pork and cattle. But if you're doing it, you could use it very similar type thing with the chickens, especially if you're parting it out and you're going to a USDA facility and you have all those added costs. So yeah, it's not as poultry friendly as it could be.
So, okay, we've got one last question. Any recommendations for low-cost software that does record keeping besides QuickBooks? Recording receipts is especially a challenge for us. And I'm just going to say one thing that my husband and I did this year, after a really disastrous, 2 years of not doing a good job keeping up with our recording. We put our receipts in every single Sunday. It's the first thing we do Sunday morning is we put our receipts in, and I put in all of our sales for the week. And so we know week by week what our net is, which has been really nice. So that's anyway, but Lee, you go ahead.
Yeah, no, QuickBooks is what we always used. I really think, the accounting department is one of those that unless you enjoy it, you like numbers, you like spreadsheets and that type of stuff, you can, I would look at farm bookkeepers, accountant types that you can hire for a couple $100 a month. Because if you can refocus a few, even a few hours a week, that adds up pretty quickly. And especially to have somebody else to do it. And a lot of those, they have that, QuickBooks, they already have their subscriptions. They just add you as a user, so it actually makes the cost of the record keeping software a little bit easier. And then you got somebody to complain when it's not to when it's not right.
So I'm just going to make one comment that Jolie pointed out, and this is really true. APA, American Pasture Poultry Producers Association, has so much information. That's amazing. If you do any poultry, you've got to be a member of theirs. And they've got spreadsheets for pretty much anything you can imagine. I was just on their website last weekend, or their member thing last weekend. So yes, and with that, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to move on. I have a few housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available tomorrow. These documents will be archived on our website, and I will email them to you all. We also have some other good webinars coming up this autumn and winter. I will send links to all of our upcoming webinars and other opportunities for farmers and ranchers in the follow-up email. A sincere thank you to my friend Lee. It was a pleasure. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone out there in the audience for their interest, attention, and fantastic questions. I hope that you all had a good experience today, and we stay in touch and connect again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.